I thought my parents finally saw my worth when they called that emergency family meeting. 20 years building their company from the ground up, bringing in over $850,000 in contracts this year alone. But when Dad cleared his throat and announced the new CEO, it wasn't my name he called. It was my brother, Marcus, who'd been with the company for exactly 18 months. The room went silent as I processed the betrayal. What happened next destroyed everything they'd worked for. Hey everyone, before we dive into this family business nightmare, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you've ever felt overlooked by your own family, hit that like button. And definitely subscribe, because this story has more twists than a soap opera. Trust me, you'll want to see how this corporate family drama unfolds. My name is Serafina, and I've been the backbone of Martinez Construction for 2 decades. While Marcus was partying through college and bouncing between startup jobs that lasted 6 months each, I was pulling all-nighters, securing permits, managing crews, and building relationships with our biggest clients. Our company specialized in luxury home renovations, and I had personally cultivated every major contract we held. The morning after that devastating announcement, I sat in my car outside the office, hands shaking as I replayed Dad's words. Marcus brings fresh energy and new perspectives that our company needs to grow. Fresh energy. The same Marcus who showed up late to client meetings and spent half his time on social media. I walked into the office with my head held high, determined to understand the reasoning behind this decision. Maybe there was something I didn't know? Some business strategy that justified passing over the person who'd increased revenue by 300% in 5 years. But what I discovered in the next few hours shattered everything I believed about my family. It started when I overheard Marcus on the phone in Dad's office door, slightly ajar. Yeah, the transition will be smooth. She doesn't know about the Henderson account details, and by the time she figures anything out, it'll be too late to matter. Henderson account. We didn't have any client named Henderson. My stomach dropped as I realized he was talking about something I wasn't supposed to know. That afternoon, while Marcus was at lunch, I did something I'd never done before. I accessed his computer. As the current operations manager, I had administrative rights to all company systems, something they'd apparently forgotten in their rush to crown the new king. What I found made me physically ill. For the past 6 months, Marcus had been systematically redirecting smaller client payments into a separate account he'd established. Nothing huge, just a few thousand here and there from jobs I'd completed. But it added up to over $40,000. Money that should have gone toward company expenses and employee bonuses was sitting in an account labeled MRM Holdings. Marcus Robert Martinez Holdings. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the email chain between Marcus and my parents discussing how to manage the transition and minimize Serafina's reaction. They'd been planning this for months. The emails revealed their true concerns. They were worried I'd demand an equal partnership stake, that I'd want too much control over family decisions, and that my emotional nature made me unsuitable for leadership. One email from Mom particularly stung. Marcus understands family loyalty in ways Sarah never will. She's always been too independent, too willing to challenge us. We need someone who'll follow the family vision without question. Too independent, too willing to challenge them. I'd spent 20 years sacrificing my personal life, turning down job offers from competitors working 80-hour weeks all out of family loyalty. And they saw that as a character flaw. But the emails also revealed something else. They were planning to gradually push me out entirely. Marcus had proposed reducing my responsibilities over the next year, eventually offering me a generous severance package to leave the company altogether. They were going to steal my life's work and pay me to disappear quietly. I printed everything, every email, every bank statement, every forged signature on the Henderson documents. Because yes, there really was a Henderson account. It was a shell company Marcus had created to launder money from our legitimate clients. As I sat in my office that evening, surrounded by evidence of my family's betrayal, I realized something crucial: they'd made one massive miscalculation. They assumed I'd accepted their decision out of family loyalty, that I'd continue working quietly while they stripped away everything I'd built. They forgot that I knew where every body was buried in this company. I knew which permits were obtained through questionable means, which inspectors Dad had befriended, with expensive dinners and golf trips which subcontractors were paid cash under the table. I knew the real profit margins on every job, the actual costs of materials when Dad claimed we were barely breaking even. Most importantly, I knew our clients. Really knew them. I'd spent years building personal relationships, understanding their needs, earning their trust. They didn't hire Martinez Construction because of our family name. They hired us because of me. The Whitmore Mansion project alone was worth $200,000. And Mrs. Whitmore specifically requested that I oversee every detail. The Blackstone commercial renovation was $350,000, and Mr. Blackstone had made it clear that my departure would mean finding a new contractor. The Sullivan Estate expansion was $300,000, and I'd spent 6 months navigating the complex zoning issues that made the project possible. These clients didn't just trust the company, they trusted me. And Marcus, despite his new title, had barely spoken to any of them beyond polite hellos at company barbecues. That night, I called my best friend Jessica, who happened to be a corporate lawyer. "Jess," I said, "I need to ask you something hypothetically. If someone discovered embezzlement and fraudulent accounts at a family business, what would be the best way to protect themselves legally?" "Hypothetically?" she asked, and I could hear the knowing tone in her voice. "Well, hypothetically, that person would need to document everything, report the crimes to the appropriate authorities, and probably distance themselves from the business immediately to avoid being implicated. And if that person had evidence of systematic fraud, then that person would have a duty to report it, family or no family." "Sarah, what's going on?" I told her everything. By the time I finished, Jessica was furious on my behalf. "You can't let them get away with this. And you definitely can't continue working there. You could be legally liable if the authorities discover the fraud and think you were involved." She was right, but I wasn't just going to report them and walk away. If my family wanted to play dirty, I was going to show them exactly what happened when they betrayed the wrong person. The next morning, I walked into the office with a plan that would either restore justice or destroy everything we'd built together. But honestly, after seeing those emails, I wasn't sure there was much worth saving anymore. I arrived at the office early before Marcus or my parents typically showed up. The first call I made was to Detective Rivera at the Financial Crimes Unit. I'd done my research. Embezzlement over $25,000 was a felony, and Marcus had stolen nearly double that amount. "Detective Rivera, my name is Serafina Martinez, and I need to report financial crimes at my family's construction company. I have documented evidence of embezzlement and fraudulent business accounts." His voice became immediately alert. "Miss Martinez, I'm going to need you to come in today to file a formal report. Can you bring all the evidence you mentioned?" "I can, but I need to know something first. If I report this and the perpetrator is a family member, am I legally protected if I continue working at the company during the investigation?" "Absolutely not. In fact, I'd strongly advise you to distance yourself immediately. If you have knowledge of ongoing fraud and continue working there, you could be considered an accessory after the fact." That sealed my decision. I wasn't just leaving. I was burning the bridge so completely that there'd be no way back for any of us. The second call was to Mrs. Whitmore. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore. This is Serafina from Martinez Construction. I'm calling to inform you that I'll no longer be overseeing your mansion project. Due to some internal company changes, I'll be ending my employment there effective immediately." The silence on the other end was deafening. Then, "I'm sorry, Serafina, but that's absolutely unacceptable. We hired Martinez Construction specifically because of your involvement. If you're not managing the project, we'll need to terminate our contract and find another contractor." "I completely understand, Mrs. Whitmore. I'll make sure to transfer all project files to you today, so your transition to a new contractor is seamless." "Actually, wait. Are you planning to start your own construction company? Because if so, We'd much rather work with you directly." I hadn't considered that possibility, but suddenly it seemed like the most logical next step. "I might be exploring that option, Mrs. Whitmore. Let me get back to you within 48 hours." The next call was to Mr. Blackstone, then the Sullivans, then every major client whose projects I'd been managing. The conversations were remarkably similar. Every single client expressed disappointment about my departure and interest in working with me independently, rather than continuing with Marcus and my parents. By 9 a.m., when my parents and Marcus arrived, I'd already secured informal commitments from clients representing over $700,000 in active contracts. But I wasn't done yet. I waited until our weekly team meeting at 10. Marcus sat at the head of the conference table for the first time, looking uncomfortable but trying to project confidence. Mom and Dad flanked him like bodyguards. The rest of our team, our project managers, foremen, and administrative staff, looked confused about the sudden power shift. "Before we begin," I said, standing up, "I have an announcement that affects everyone in this room." Marcus frowned. "Sarah, I think it's more appropriate if I handle company announcements now." I smiled coldly. "This isn't a company announcement, Marcus. This is a personal one. As of today, I'm resigning from Martinez Construction." The room erupted. Dad's face went white. Mom actually gasped. Our project manager, Carlos, who'd worked with me for 15 years, looked stunned. "Furthermore," I continued, my voice steady despite my racing heart, "I'm also obligated to inform everyone that I've filed a formal report with the Financial Crimes Unit regarding systematic embezzlement and fraud that I discovered in our company accounts." Now Marcus went pale. "Sarah, you can't be serious. We're family. Family." I laughed, and it sounded bitter even to me. Family doesn't steal from each other, Marcus. Family doesn't plan secret meetings about how to push out the person who built this company's reputation. I pulled out copies of the emails and bank statements, placing them on the conference table. Everyone here deserves to know the truth about why I'm leaving and what they might be walking into. Dad finally found his voice. "Serafina, you're being incredibly irresponsible. We can discuss any concerns you have privately as a family." "The time for family discussions ended when you spent 6 months planning my professional execution behind my back." I turned to address the entire team. "I want you all to know that I've spoken with our major clients this morning. Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Blackstone, and the Sullivans have all expressed interest in terminating their contracts with Martinez Construction if I'm not involved in their projects." The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. Carlos was the first to speak. "Sarah, what does this mean for our jobs?" "That depends on what Marcus and my parents decide to do about the upcoming investigation and the client contracts that are now in jeopardy." I looked directly at Marcus. "I'd estimate that without those 3 projects alone, you're looking at losing approximately $850,000 in contracted work." Marcus's face had gone from pale to green. "You can't do this to us. This is our family legacy." "I'm not doing anything to you, Marcus. I'm responding to what you already did to me." I gathered my papers and headed toward the door. "My resignation letter will be on your desk within the hour, along with all project files and client contact information. What you do with that information is up to you." Mom finally spoke, her voice shaky. "Sarah, please. We can work this out. You're being too hasty." I turned back one last time. "I spent 20 years being loyal to this family while you questioned my commitment and competence behind my back. I spent 6 months unwittingly covering for Marcus's embezzlement while you planned to make him CEO over me. The only hasty decision was yours. You just didn't expect consequences." As I walked out, I heard Dad's voice. "She's bluffing. The clients won't actually leave." But Carlos's response made me smile. "Mr. Martinez, with all due respect, every major client we have specifically requests Sarah for their projects. If she's really starting her own company—" I didn't stick around to hear the rest of the conversation, but I didn't need to. The mathematical reality was simple. Without me, they'd lose most of their client base. Without their client base, They couldn't sustain the business. And with a fraud investigation looming, they had bigger problems than just my departure. By noon, my phone was ringing constantly. Clients, suppliers, even some of our subcontractors were calling to ask about the rumors spreading through the construction community. Word traveled fast in our industry, and apparently the news that Serafina Martinez was leaving the family business had shocked everyone who knew our history. But the most satisfying call came at 2 p.m. It was Jessica. "Sarah, I just got off the phone with Detective Rivera. He reviewed your evidence and they're fast-tracking the investigation. Marcus is going to be arrested within the week." The next morning brought chaos I hadn't anticipated. My phone started ringing at 6 a.m. with calls from industry contacts, former colleagues, and even competitors who'd heard about my dramatic departure from Martinez Construction. But the most important call came from an unexpected source. "Miss Martinez, this is James Hendricks from Hendricks & Associates. We're the accounting firm that handles several of your former clients' finances. I'm calling because Mrs. Whitmore asked me to reach out to you about forming your own construction company." I nearly dropped my coffee. "Mr. Hendricks, I appreciate Mrs. Whitmore's confidence, but I only decided to leave yesterday. I haven't had time to consider starting my own business." "That's exactly why she asked me to call. She'd like to offer you a business partnership opportunity. She's willing to provide startup capital and serve as your first major client if you're interested in going independent." Mrs. Whitmore was serious about following me. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A meeting this afternoon, if you're available. Mrs. Whitmore has some ideas that might interest you, and frankly, after the rumors circulating about Martinez Construction's legal troubles, several of our other clients are looking for alternative contractors." 2 hours later, I found myself in Mrs. Whitmore's elegant home office, listening to a proposal that sounded too good to be true. She sat behind a mahogany desk that probably cost more than most people's cars, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. "Serafina, I've been in business for 40 years, and I've learned to recognize exceptional talent when I see it. You've managed my family's projects for 5 years, and every single one has been completed on time, under budget, and beyond our expectations." She slid a folder across the desk. "I'm proposing to fund your new company with an initial investment of $200,000 in exchange for a 20% partnership stake. You'd maintain full operational control, and I'd provide business mentorship and access to my network of contacts." I opened the folder, scanning the preliminary business plan she'd already had drafted. "Mrs. Whitmore, this is incredibly generous, but why would you take such a risk on someone who just quit their family business under dramatic circumstances?" Her smile was sharp. "Because I've been watching your family undervalue you for years, and I believe in betting on winners. Plus, I spoke with Margaret Blackstone and Catherine Sullivan this morning. We're all prepared to transfer our contracts to your new company if you accept this proposal." The numbers were staggering. With those 3 clients alone, I'd have over $700,000 in guaranteed work before I even officially opened for business. But there was something else in her expression, something calculating that made me curious. "There's another reason you're offering this, isn't there?" She laughed, a sound like crystal chiming. "You really are perceptive. Yes, there is. I've had concerns about your family's business practices for some time. Nothing I could prove, mind you, but small inconsistencies in billing materials that seemed overpriced, timelines that stretched longer than necessary. When you mentioned ongoing investigations yesterday, it confirmed my suspicions." She leaned forward. "Serafina, I think your family has been systematically overcharging clients for years. With you managing the operational details, it was harder to detect, but Marcus doesn't have your competence. If my theory is correct, they're about to face much bigger problems than losing a few contracts." That afternoon, I met with 2 more potential allies. Carlos, my former project manager, called asking if I'd consider hiring him if I started my own company. "Sarah, things are falling apart fast over there. 3 more clients called today asking about your status, and Mr. Martinez had a screaming match with Marcus about the missing money. Carlos, I need to ask you something confidentially. Have you noticed anything suspicious about our billing practices over the years? Overcharges, inflated material costs, anything like that? The pause was telling. Sarah, I always handled the operational side and trusted the administrative team for billing details. But now that you mention it, there were times when the profit margins seemed unusually high for certain projects. I assumed your dad was just good at negotiating supplier deals. Would you be willing to review some project files if I asked? Specifically looking for patterns in pricing and billing. For you, absolutely. Especially if it means getting away from this mess before it gets worse. My second ally came from an unexpected source. Elena Rodriguez, a former colleague who'd left Martinez Construction 3 years earlier to start her own architectural firm, reached out after hearing about my departure. Sarah, I've been wanting to reconnect ever since I heard the news. I left Martinez for similar reasons. I felt undervalued and overlooked despite bringing in significant business, but I've learned some things since then that might interest you. We met at a coffee shop downtown, and Elena's revelations added another layer to my understanding of my family's questionable practices. After I left, I started hearing things from other contractors and suppliers. Your family has a reputation for being difficult to work with, and not just because they're demanding. Several suppliers mentioned getting paid late consistently, and others said they'd been asked to provide duplicate invoices for the same materials. Duplicate invoices? For insurance claims, supposedly. But it made some people uncomfortable enough that they stopped working with Martinez Construction entirely. Elena pulled out a notebook. I've been keeping informal track of these conversations, thinking someday it might be relevant. With everything that's happening now, I thought you should know. She documented over a dozen instances of questionable practices spanning the past 5 years. Late payments, duplicate billing, inflated insurance claims, and even reports of materials being delivered to job sites but never used on the actual projects. Elena, this suggests systematic fraud that goes way beyond Marcus's embezzlement. This is insurance fraud, tax evasion, and contractor fraud. Exactly. And Sarah, here's the thing. Most of these incidents happened when you were managing different projects. You were so focused on the construction side that you never saw what your parents were doing on the business side. That evening, I called Detective Rivera with an update. Detective, I have new information about the Martinez Construction case. It appears the embezzlement I reported might be part of a much larger pattern of fraud. Miss Martinez, I'm glad you called. Our preliminary investigation has already uncovered several red flags beyond your brother's embezzlement. We're expanding the scope to include possible insurance fraud and tax evasion. Would you be willing to provide additional information if we need it? Absolutely. And Detective, I think I can provide access to witnesses who've observed questionable practices over several years. After hanging up, I realized something profound had shifted. 24 hours ago, I'd been a betrayed daughter, walking away from her family business. Now, I was the center of a growing alliance dedicated to exposing systematic fraud and corruption. Mrs. Whitmore called that evening with final details about our partnership. Serafina, I've spoken with my lawyer, and we can have your new company incorporated by next week. I suggest we call it Whitmore Martinez Construction with you as majority owner and CEO. Mrs. Whitmore, are you sure about this? Once the full investigation becomes public, my family name might become a liability in the construction industry. My dear, by the time this investigation concludes, your name will be associated with integrity and justice, not with your family's crimes. Trust me. I've seen this before. The person who exposes corruption becomes the hero of the story, not the villain. But even as I felt excitement about my new business venture and satisfaction about bringing my family's crimes to light, I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still coming. My family wouldn't go down without a fight, and people who'd engaged in years of systematic fraud wouldn't hesitate to use every weapon at their disposal to protect themselves. I just didn't realize yet that one of those weapons would be someone I was starting to trust. What happened next would test every alliance I'd built and force me to discover just how deep my family's corruption really went. 3 weeks into building Whitmore Martinez construction, everything seemed to be falling perfectly into place. Elena had joined as our head architect. Carlos was managing our field operations, and Mrs. Whitmore's connections had brought us 2 additional clients worth over $400,000. The investigation into Martinez construction was progressing, and Detective Rivera had informed me that Marcus would likely face formal charges within days. Then Carlos destroyed everything with a single phone call. "Sarah, we need to talk immediately. Can you meet me at the office tonight after hours? It's about the Martinez investigation, and I can't discuss it over the phone." Something in his voice made my stomach clench, but I agreed to meet him at 8 p.m. Our temporary office was a small space Mrs. Whitmore had helped us lease downtown. Nothing fancy, but functional while we established ourselves. Carlos was waiting in the parking lot when I arrived, pacing nervously by his truck. In the 3 weeks since he'd joined my company, I'd never seen him look so agitated. "Carlos, what's going on? You sounded panicked on the phone." He couldn't meet my eyes. "Sarah, I need to tell you something and you're going to hate me for it." My heart started racing. "Just tell me." "Your parents contacted me yesterday. They offered me $50,000 in guaranteed employment if I'd provide them with information about your new business and anything you might have told the police." The betrayal hit like a physical blow. Carlos had been my right hand for 15 years. I'd trusted him with everything: client information, business strategies, even details about the investigation. "Carlos, please tell me you didn't." "I did." His voice cracked. "Sarah, my daughter needs surgery, and my insurance won't cover it. $50,000 would pay for everything she needs. I've been feeding them information for the past 2 weeks." I sat down heavily on the hood of my car, trying to process what he was telling me. "What kind of information?" "Your client list, your business plan details about Mrs. Whitmore's investment, and—" He paused, looking sick. "I told them about Elena's notebook documenting the supplier complaints. They know about the insurance fraud evidence." "Carlos, do you understand what you've done? They're going to use that information to cover their tracks before the investigation can expose everything." "I know, and I'm sorry. But Sarah, there's more." He finally looked at me directly. "They didn't just ask for information. They're planning to destroy your new business." "What do you mean?" "They're going to file complaints with the state contractor licensing board claiming you stole proprietary business methods and client lists when you left Martinez Construction. They're also planning to sue Mrs. Whitmore for interference with existing contracts." The scope of their retaliation was breathtaking. "How do they expect to win those lawsuits when they're under investigation for fraud?" "Because they're claiming you fabricated the fraud evidence to justify stealing their business. Your dad has been meeting with lawyers all week, building a case that you're a disgruntled employee making false accusations." I felt like the ground was shifting beneath me. "Carlos, please tell me you haven't given them anything that could actually help them succeed." His silence was answer enough. "What else did you tell them?" "I gave them copies of Elena's documentation about the supplier complaints. But Sarah, your parents claim those suppliers are lying because they were terminated for poor performance. They have documentation going back years showing quality issues and payment disputes with those same suppliers." My mind raced. If my parents had anticipated this kind of investigation, they could have spent years creating false documentation to discredit any witnesses against them. "What about the embezzlement evidence? They can't fabricate explanations for Marcus's separate bank accounts." "Actually, they might be able to." Carlos looked miserable. "Marcus is claiming that account was authorized by your parents for a legitimate business purpose, setting aside money for a surprise bonus program for long-term employees. He says he has written authorization from your dad." "That's ridiculous. The account was clearly being used to steal client payments." "But if they can produce documentation showing it was authorized, and if they can argue that you had access to the same financial systems Marcus did—" Carlos trailed off. The implication hit me like a truck. "They're going to claim I was involved in the embezzlement and that I'm trying to frame Marcus to cover my own tracks." Sarah, I'm so sorry. I never intended for it to go this far. I just needed the money for my daughter's surgery, and I thought maybe I could give them harmless information about your business plans. I stood up, anger finally overriding the shock and betrayal. Carlos, you've potentially destroyed not just my business, but any chance of bringing them to justice. They now have weeks to fabricate evidence, destroy incriminating documents, and build a case that makes me look like the criminal. I know. That's why I'm telling you now. I couldn't live with myself if I let this continue without warning you. What else? What other damage have you done? They know about Mrs. Whitmore's investment structure and your partnership agreement. They're planning to argue that you had already started your competing business before you officially resigned, which would support their claim that you stole clients and proprietary information. The legal implications were staggering. If my parents could prove I'd been planning my departure and new business while still employed at Martinez Construction, they could potentially claim theft of trade secrets, breach of fiduciary duty, and intentional interference with their business relationships. Carlos, I need you to do something for me. I need you to document everything you told them and everything they told you. Dates, times, exactly what was discussed. Sarah, I can't. If I cooperate with you against them, they'll expose my involvement to your new clients. Mrs. Whitmore would never trust me again, and I'd lose this job too. You're going to lose this job anyway, Carlos. I can't have someone on my team who's been feeding information to my enemies for 2 weeks. The words hurt to say, but I had no choice. The question is whether you're going to help me minimize the damage you've caused, or whether you're going to let my family destroy everything while protecting yourself. He was quiet for a long moment. What would you need me to do? First, I need you to wear a wire for any future conversations with my parents. Second, I need you to help me document the real timeline of events. When you were actually approached, what information was shared, and how they're planning to use it. Sarah, if they find out I'm working with you, they'll destroy me. They know about my daughter's medical needs, and they've made it clear they'll make sure I never work in construction again if I betray them. I looked at Carlos, this man I'd trusted for 15 years, who'd been like a brother to me, and realized that sometimes betrayal reveals people's true character under pressure. He wasn't evil. He was desperate and scared, but that didn't make the damage any less devastating. Carlos, I understand you're in an impossible situation, but you need to understand something too. If my parents succeed in framing me for their crimes, they'll have no reason to keep paying you or protecting your secrets. People who engage in systematic fraud don't leave loose ends. The fear in his eyes told me he'd already considered that possibility. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting with Mrs. Whitmore and Elena to explain Carlos's betrayal and the legal threats we were now facing. Mrs. Whitmore listened to everything with the calm demeanor of someone who'd weathered many business storms, while Elena looked increasingly furious. So let me understand this correctly, Mrs. Whitmore said after I finished explaining. Your family now knows our entire business structure, client list, and investment details. They're planning to claim you stole their business methods and committed the fraud you're accusing them of. And our project manager has been feeding them information for 2 weeks. That's the situation, yes. I understand if you want to withdraw your investment and partnership. This has become much more complicated and risky than either of us anticipated. Mrs. Whitmore smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. My dear, I've been dealing with corrupt business practices for 40 years. Your family just made a critical error. They assumed I was a naive, elderly woman who could be intimidated by legal threats. She pulled out her phone and made a call. James, it's Margaret Whitmore. I need you to conference in Detective Rivera immediately, and then I need you to contact David Chen at the State Attorney General's office. Tell him I have information about a construction company that may be engaging in systematic fraud and witness intimidation. Elena leaned forward. Mrs. Whitmore, what aren't you telling us? Well, for starters, I've been recording every conversation I've had with Martinez Construction for the past 2 years. Standard practice in my business dealings and perfectly legal since I always inform people that calls may be recorded for quality assurance. My mouth fell open. You've been recording calls with my family. Every single one, including several conversations where your father mentioned creative billing practices and your mother discussed ways to maximize profit margins on projects. I originally kept the recordings for my own protection, but given recent developments, they've become quite relevant to the criminal investigation. She pulled out a small device from her purse. I also took the liberty of recording yesterday's conversation when your father called, attempting to intimidate me about our business partnership. He made several statements that could be considered witness intimidation and obstruction of justice. Elena started laughing. Mrs. Whitmore, you're absolutely diabolical. What did my dad say? Among other things, he suggested that I might face legal consequences for funding a business built on stolen assets. He also implied that my family's construction permits might face additional scrutiny if I continued supporting you. Classic intimidation tactics, but unfortunately for him, I know the mayor personally. The phone rang, and Mrs. Whitmore answered on speaker. Detective Rivera, this is Margaret Whitmore. I believe we spoke briefly last week about the Martinez construction investigation. Yes, Mrs. Whitmore. How can I help you today? I have recordings of multiple conversations that may be relevant to your case, including what appears to be witness intimidation attempts from yesterday. I'm also prepared to provide documentation of questionable billing practices spanning the past 2 years. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to need you to come in immediately. These recordings could be crucial evidence, especially if they demonstrate a pattern of fraud that predates the embezzlement we're currently investigating. After hanging up, Mrs. Whitmore turned to me. Serafina, your family made another crucial mistake. They assumed you were their only threat. They never considered that their business practices might have created multiple witnesses with evidence of their wrongdoing. What do you mean? I made some calls this morning after learning about Carlos's situation. It turns out I'm not the only client who's been documenting suspicious interactions with Martinez Construction. She pulled out a folder thick with documents. Catherine Sullivan has been keeping detailed records of billing discrepancies on her estate project. She noticed that material costs seemed to fluctuate dramatically between invoices, and she started requesting itemized receipts for everything. Elena examined the documents. These show the same materials being billed at completely different prices on the same project. How is that even possible? Because they were billing her for premium materials while using standard-grade supplies, then pocketing the difference. Catherine has photographs of the actual materials delivered versus what was listed on the invoices. My head was spinning. How many other clients have evidence like this? At least 4 that I know of, and here's the interesting part. All of these discrepancies occurred while you were managing the project details. Your family was using your reputation and competence as cover while systematically defrauding clients behind your back. The scope of their betrayal was even worse than I'd imagined. Not only had they stolen from the company and planned to force me out, but they'd been using my name and relationships to commit fraud against people who trusted me. Mrs. Whitmore's phone rang again. This time it was someone named David Chen from the State Attorney General's office. Margaret, I got your message about the Martinez construction situation. Given what you've described, we're looking at potential RICO violations if this involves systematic fraud across multiple clients and projects. David, I think it's worse than that. Based on the documentation I've collected, this appears to be a family business that's been systematically defrauding clients while using their daughter's reputation and relationships as cover. The daughter recently discovered the fraud and reported it, and now the family is attempting witness intimidation. We need to move fast before they can destroy evidence or intimidate additional witnesses. Can you have all the documentation ready for review this afternoon? After that call ended, Mrs. Whitmore looked at me seriously. Serafina, I need to ask you something important. Are you prepared for this to become much bigger than just a family business dispute? What do you mean? I mean that based on the evidence we've collected, your family may be looking at federal charges. Systematic fraud across state lines, potential money laundering, witness intimidation. These are serious crimes that carry prison sentences. The reality of the situation hit me. This wasn't just about business revenge or family betrayal anymore. This was about criminal activity that had been occurring for years while I unwittingly provided credibility and cover. Mrs. Whitmore, I need to know something. Why are you helping me to this extent? This goes far beyond a business partnership. She was quiet for a moment. Because 20 years ago, I was in a similar situation. My first husband's family business was systematically defrauding clients, while I managed the operational side. When I discovered it and tried to report it, they destroyed my reputation and drove me out of the industry. What happened? They succeeded in covering everything up because I didn't have allies or evidence. I lost everything: my business, my reputation, and my first marriage. I spent years rebuilding my life and swore that if I ever encountered a similar situation, I'd use my resources to ensure justice was served. Elena reached over and squeezed my hand. Sarah, you're not alone in this. We're going to make sure your family faces consequences for what they've done, and we're going to build something better from the ashes of their corruption. That afternoon, we delivered over 200 pages of documentation to Detective Rivera and the State Attorney General's office. By evening, search warrants had been issued for Martinez Construction's offices, and my parents' assets had been frozen pending investigation. The war was far from over, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like we had the weapons to win it. 6 months later, I stood in the courtroom as the judge delivered final sentences in the state of California versus Martinez Construction and its principals. Mom received 3 years for conspiracy to commit fraud and tax evasion. Dad got 5 years for orchestrating the scheme and attempting witness intimidation. Marcus received 4 years for embezzlement and money laundering. But the most satisfying moment came when the judge addressed the packed courtroom about the scope of their crimes. This case represents one of the most systematic examples of construction fraud this court has seen. Over a period of 5 years, the defendants defrauded clients of over $1.2 million while using their daughter's reputation and expertise to provide credibility to their operations. He looked directly at my family's table. What makes this case particularly egregious is the defendants' attempt to frame their own daughter for the crimes they committed, and their ongoing efforts to intimidate witnesses and obstruct justice even after charges were filed. The restitution orders were comprehensive. Every defrauded client received full compensation plus damages. The IRS seizure of their assets covered most of the financial penalties, but it meant the complete dissolution of Martinez Construction. Carlos, who'd ultimately cooperated with the investigation after Mrs. Whitmore helped pay for his daughter's surgery, received probation and community service. His testimony about my family's attempts to recruit him as a witness against me had been crucial in proving the obstruction of justice charges. But the most unexpected vindication came from the construction industry itself. Once the details of the investigation became public, contractors, suppliers, and clients throughout the state reached out to share their own stories of questionable dealings with Martinez Construction. The pattern of fraud was so extensive that it made national construction industry publications as a cautionary tale about family business corruption. Today, 18 months after walking out of that devastating family meeting, Whitmore Martinez Construction employs 42 people and has completed over $3 million in projects. Elena designed our headquarters building, which won a Sustainable Architecture Award last month. Carlos manages our field operations and has become one of our most trusted employees after proving himself through consistent, honest work. Mrs. Whitmore remains my business partner and mentor, but our relationship has evolved into something deeper. She's become the mother figure I needed after losing my biological family to their own greed and corruption. She taught me that sometimes chosen family provides more loyalty and support than blood relatives ever could. The most healing part of this journey has been rebuilding relationships with the clients my family defrauded. Every single person who'd been overcharged or cheated received personal apologies and full restitution through our victim compensation fund. Many of them have since hired us for new projects, saying they appreciated our commitment to integrity and transparency. Last month, I received a letter that brought tears to my eyes. It was from Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman whose kitchen renovation had been one of Marcus's first fraud victims. She wrote that the money she received in restitution allowed her to finally afford the medical care she'd been postponing, and that seeing justice served had restored her faith in honest business practices. But perhaps the most profound change has been within myself. For 20 years, I defined my worth through my family's approval and recognition. I worked 80-hour weeks and sacrificed personal relationships because I believed family loyalty was the highest virtue. Discovering their betrayal forced me to confront a painful truth: I'd been enabling their corruption through my competence and reputation. The guilt of unknowingly providing cover for their crimes was almost overwhelming at first. But therapy and the support of my chosen family helped me understand that being a victim of manipulation doesn't make you responsible for the manipulator's actions. My family used my dedication and expertise to commit crimes, but that reflects their character, not mine. Today, Whitmore Martinez Construction operates with complete financial transparency. Every client receives detailed, itemized billing, multiple supplier quotes, and photographic documentation of materials used. We've implemented systems that make the kind of fraud my family committed virtually impossible. More importantly, we've created a company culture based on genuine integrity rather than family obligation. Our employees stay because they're valued and fairly compensated, not because they're trapped by family loyalty or financial desperation. The hardest part of this entire experience has been mourning the family I thought I had while learning to appreciate the family I've chosen. I haven't spoken to my parents or Marcus since the trial ended. They've reached out through intermediaries, claiming they want to reconcile and rebuild our relationship. But reconciliation requires acknowledgement of wrongdoing and genuine change, neither of which they've demonstrated. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never discovered Marcus's embezzlement, if I'd accepted my parents' decision quietly and continued working for them. The investigation revealed that their fraud was escalating, and eventually their crimes would have been exposed anyway. But I might have been implicated as an unwitting accomplice, and dozens more clients would have been victimized before justice was served. In fighting for justice, I didn't just save myself. I protected future victims and helped expose systematic corruption that had been harming people for years. The construction industry in our region is now more vigilant about fraud prevention, partly because our case demonstrated how family businesses can use emotional manipulation to cover financial crimes. Several trade organizations have implemented new transparency requirements based on recommendations from our case. Mrs. Whitmore often says that the best revenge is living well, and I think she's right. My family tried to destroy my reputation and frame me for their crimes, but instead, their actions led to me building something better than anything they ever created. Tonight, I'm having dinner with Elena and her husband, Mrs. Whitmore, and her grandson, and Carlos and his daughter, who's now fully recovered from her surgery. We're celebrating the completion of our latest project, a community center that will serve low-income families in East Oakland. This is my family now, people who chose to stand with me when everything fell apart, people who value integrity over profit, and people who believe that building something meaningful matters more than preserving something corrupt. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? Have you discovered that people you trusted were using your reputation for their own gain? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes sharing these experiences helps us all heal and grow stronger. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life family drama stories. Share this video with anyone who might be struggling with similar family business conflicts or wondering whether to report suspected fraud. Sometimes we all need to know that justice is possible. Thank you for watching my journey from family betrayal to chosen family triumph. Remember, sometimes the most difficult decisions lead to the most meaningful transformations, and standing up for justice is always worth the cost.